Welcome to Listening with China Blue. This is a podcast that focuses on how listening not only informs us about what is occurring in the world around us, but also helps us connect with others, build stronger businesses, strengthens our mental health, and become more creative and compassionate individuals. As more and more people practice attentive listening in a community, it becomes a community-building practice that strengthens our mental health as we learn from our neighbors. I will be interviewing people from all walks of life to learn how listening has informed them in their field and helped them to make intelligent decisions. They will be artists, musicians, composers, dancers, business people, psychologists, neuroscientists, and Buddhists, to name a few. About me, I'm an internationally exhibiting sound-based artist. In my work, Discovering Unheard Sounds, I realized that the core component that drove my work was simply listening. That realization put me on the path of speaking about and helping people learn to become better listeners. I began with leading sound walks, which I continue to do in the upstate New York region, to help people learn to listen from nature. And now, tune your ears to this podcast to learn about the power of listening. And do pay attention until the end for further information on how to start your own listening practice, share it with others, and to support Listening with China Blue. Today we are speaking with Dame Evelyn Glennie, who is the world's premier solo percussionist. Her solo recordings exceed 40 CDs. A double Grammy Award winner and a BAFTA nominee, Evelyn composes for film, theater, and television. The Evelyn Glennie Podcast was launched in 2020. Evelyn was awarded an Obie in 1993 and has over 100 international awards to date, including the Polar Music Prize, the Léonie Sonning Music Prize, and the Companion of Honor. Evelyn is curator for the Evelyn Glennie Collection. Her iconic film Touch the Sound, TED Talk, and charity, the Evelyn Glennie Foundation, embody her lifelong mission to teach the world to listen. Welcome, Evelyn.
Hello, China. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here with you finally after all these years. You know, we met a number of years ago when my husband, Dr. Seth Horowitz, and you were being interviewed for a movie in Vancouver. And it was there that I learned about your incredible history as a percussionist and became completely engaged with your commitment to listening. So I would love to begin with hearing about your lifelong history about being a percussionist and how listening became such a central part to your work.
Well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to chat with you after all this time. And I have very, very fond memories of obviously meeting you and, of course, Seth. You're just so, so, so lovely. Yes, I mean, I was brought up on a farm in the northeast of Scotland, first of all, and I think probably the farm was my orchestra without really realizing it. But somehow I was intrigued by, I think, the seasons that you very much experience when you're in that kind of landscape. Everything seems to be magnified and everything is connected with the seasons. So you learn a lot about patience and the kind of connection that you have with livestock, with machinery, with the land itself. Of course, you know, it's always musical somehow, and everything integrates with each other. Everything is connected, and as I say, that sense of patience where you can't force the weather. You know, you can't push the seasons. You can't make the livestock do things that you don't want them to do, or whatever it might be. And so you really go along with the flow or the resonance of that type of upbringing. And I think musically, you know, this is what you do as a musician. You have to respect the sound from the objects that you're negotiating and manipulating and connecting with. But it isn't just the instruments, it's a space that you're in, the people that you're sharing the music with, whether that's other collaborators or audience members. I mean, in a way, we're all collaborators. So I think that kind of upbringing was really important in, I guess, shaping my particular journey as a sound creator first and foremost. But it was really at the age of 12 when I started percussion, and I met a wonderful school peripatetic percussion teacher. He visited many schools throughout the northeast of Scotland. And, those were in the days whereby really every child had the opportunity to learn a musical instrument free of charge. Very different days that we live in now. So we were very, very lucky, that generation. And a lot of people wanted to play percussion. So I had to put my name on a list and wait a while before I met the peripatetic teacher, Ron Forbes. And at the time, I was dependent on hearing aids. And interestingly, as I was thinking that sound needed to come through the ears, he sort of realized that, well, what would happen if you took your hearing aids off and placed your hands on the wall? Would this change something? Would your senses change, how your senses connect with each other? And what I found was that I could obviously, experience the impact of the stick on a timpani. I think it was a timpani that he played. But what was remarkable was that the hands could actually perceive the resonance of that sound, the journey of the sound. And this was just like the sun rays, hitting my whole body. Basically, my body became a huge ear. It became like a resonator. And it really allowed me to respect not just that impact of sound, that sort of initial reaction. Sometimes when we have a conversation, we sort of jump in, or we predict what someone's going to say, or we hear but we don't listen, or we make very quick assumptions and things like that. And that can happen with sound, but by opening the body up, as actually, really, really digesting the whole meal, as it were, that sound meal. And it was just amazing. So that really helped me understand my teacher's kind of way of teaching, in that he always saw all of his pupils as sound creators first and foremost, and then musicians, because you have to understand the structure of that musical sentence or phrase, and then percussionists. So you need a tool. So it doesn't matter whether you're playing the violin or a cello or an oboe or a marimba or the clarinet or whatever, those are just tools that we use to create a sound. But ultimately, it has to have that kind of human involvement, that raw hand, that imagination, that sense of curiosity and so on, to really explore and peel the layers of that particular instrument. So I think that, this sort of lifelong curiosity I've had towards sound has been incredibly important, because it's opened up so many musical avenues of participation, from obviously my main focus was on solo percussion, because there had not been a full-time solo percussionist before. And
Wow.
to literally earn your bread and butter as a solo percussionist was very unusual. And so I was determined to increase the repertoire, to work with composers all over the world, and to get percussion from the back of the orchestra to the front. And I
Mhm.
really wanted promoters to see percussion in the same way that they would view a concert pianist or a concert violinist and so on. So they needed that choice to have percussion at the front of the platform. But obviously, curiosity towards sound, that can take you into the whole landscape of composing, whether it's for the concert platform or for media. I mean, I've just finished co-composing a 6-part TV crime drama, which, allowed me to use so many of the unusual percussion instruments from the Evelyn Glennie Collection. So yes, I think that it really just all started from the beginning, perhaps without realizing, as such a young person.
Oh my gosh, that's such a wonderful, wonderful story, and it paints such a beautiful and big picture for, that I can imagine from from the very early days that you were born. It's just so fabulous to imagine that sense of respect that was established so early for you. And, you know, one thing that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, and I wanted to highlight, is that when you play, you take off your shoes.
Well, most of the time I take my shoes off, not always, because if
Oh,
I'm in
well.
a if I'm in a cold church or cathedral or something with stone floors, then I'm inclined to keep my socks or stockings or something on my feet. But also sometimes, and actually more often than not nowadays, because I often hire instruments. You know, if I'm playing abroad and so on, I don't use my own instruments anymore. But sometimes the height of the instruments can not always be compatible with my own height. So often the lowest height that some of the marimbas go, for example, are still quite high. And I'm 5'2", so not the tallest person on the planet. And it does mean that sometimes I have to wear shoes in order to make myself just a few inches taller.
Sure.
And therefore the posture is better. But ideally, I like to take my shoes off for several reasons. Partly, your balance is much better without shoes. Certainly, if you're wearing a heel or something, then it's not a great position to be. But I think that when when you have your shoes off, you can really manipulate your feet really well, just like a dancer. And
Mhm.
especially when you're negotiating multi setups that are several feet apart, or a marimba that is about 9 foot long or whatever, it's quite a large distance to go from side to side and then forward and back. But
Mhm.
also, of course, you do feel a lot more connected with the sound. And there's something
Right,
really,
right. And that was the part that I was quite interested in because, Seth was a neuroscientist and he was pointing out that how you were actually feeling, hearing the sound and the vibrations through your feet, and it helped you hear the sound clearer.
well, I think that it makes you more aware of resonance. Um, and it's interesting to use the word to hear the sound clearer. I don't really see it like that. I think it's to
Uh,
be more engaged with the sound, um, because a, a very very soft dynamic may not be something that is heard through the ears, so you may not hear it perhaps, but it's something that the feet might well pick up. Not all the time, of course. It depends on the frequency. It depends on the type of floor and all sorts of things, and just your own energy and focus, because that kind of thing requires a lot of concentration. So it's not just something that you magically do and make sense of. You've really, really got to concentrate on that and sort of make it the only thing that you're really doing. And there's also something quite interesting in that as the player, so because I'm usually at one side of an instrument, so I'm on the player side of a marimba or the player side of a vibraphone, so I will feel the sound quite differently to perhaps an audience member who might be sitting in the first row. They may not feel it through the feet, but they may feel it through their chest or their neck or something. So I think that's the interesting thing about resonance and about vibration and physically feeling sound, is that we will all feel it in a different way depending on where we're placed in that space. So sometimes, I may, be rehearsing with the percussion at the front of the orchestra or something, or I may be giving a recital, and there may be some deaf people who have come along to an open rehearsal, and they may be sitting in the auditorium, and then they have the opportunity to come up on stage. And it's amazing the difference that they feel, and they 9 times out of 10 express, my gosh, they experience far more when they're on stage right close to the instruments. Obviously, I mean, that's a pretty obvious thing to say, but nevertheless, it's such a marked difference. And it just shows you how much, in a way, audiences miss, when they are sitting in the auditorium. So they will sometimes miss this physical thing, especially when it's, instruments that are not amplified or reinforced, or doesn't have a steady beat, that you can see. It's very different with pop music or rock music or that type of thing that has this regular beat. But when it's perhaps something quite contemporary, and the time signatures are changing, and you're not sure of the orchestration, that can be quite different.
Wow. And that brought up the question for me is that do you focus on a particular style, or do you engage in all styles?
Well, as a percussion player, I don't really think of styles in a way. Music is music, and whatever I feel I can contribute to, I will be curious towards. So, a lot of the music that I have played and continue to play are by living composers. The pieces are by living composers. So
Nice.
how do you classify that? Do you say that's contemporary music? What sort of description do we use? We usually say contemporary music, but it's too early to categorize their music. They're still alive. So
Sure.
I remember at the beginning of my career, and to a certain extent, even now, people say I'm a classical percussionist, and I've never quite understood that at all. Because again, we think of a classical era in music, Beethoven's time, Mozart's time, and so on. And to say that you're a classical percussionist, I don't quite, I don't understand how that term has connected with what I do. Um, and I've worked with jazz musicians, with folk musicians, with electronic musicians, with improvisers, with people who can read music, people who can't read music, with experienced musicians, with amateurs, with all kinds of musicians. And it doesn't matter. Music is music because it's sound. Music is sound. Even if
Sure.
we think of silence, with something like John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds, we imagine that's about silence, but actually it's not. And I think it's fascinating that when you open up your antennae and kind of get rid of the categorizations, then suddenly the possibilities become much more visible in a way, and the opportunities greater.
That's wonderful because when I think of musicians, I usually think about how you learn about them through their particular style often. At least I do as a generalist listening to music. And I think, okay, I like ambient, for example, or I like jazz, or I like classical. So I'll focus on people who perform in that kind of genre. So to think about a musician who is as broad and embracing as you are, it turns my brain around.
Yeah, well, I think it's more where you feel you can uh, place your voice, whatever that is, but also just have that sense of curiosity. So, for example, I remember I was approached by a jazz trio here in the UK, and uh, and they asked if I would take part and play in one track in their debut recording. Now, I immediately said yes without actually knowing who or what they were. And so I was like a student, say yes to everything. And so I said yes. And then I received the music and I thought, oh, crumbs. Wow, oh, right, this needs a bit of looking at. And I found it took me ages and ages to get into this music. It was like almost like a counting exercise, first of all, because it was so complicated.
Oh,
And normally I quite like to just fairly quickly find a story, find an emotion in a piece, but I was finding no emotion at all. I was literally having to count and work out where the notes landed.
oh,
And eventually, I thought, okay, well, I'll just work through this. And bit by bit by bit, just like building a house or something, one brick at a time, you lay a kind of strong foundation, and then the next layer and the next layer and so on. And it took patience. So I just sort of remembered my upbringing and just thought, go with the natural speed of learning this piece. Don't try and push and push and push and practice for hours and hours and hours. Just go with the natural pace that you want to follow for this piece of music. And then eventually, when I did record it, it was just such a revelation musically to piece it all together. And then, half jokingly, I said to the trio, "Oh, haha, wouldn't it be fun if we did this live, in an actual live performance?" Thinking, no, of course not, that'll never happen. And then the next thing I knew was that we were at the Bristol Jazz Festival. And then they asked if I would participate in more tracks and so on. But then I knew the process that I needed to go through in order to negotiate this kind of music. So it was no longer a kind of daunting experience. It was still scary, but not daunting. And I knew that I just needed to give the whole process its natural time. So, but I think it could have been easy for me to say, that's not my style of music. And oh no, I don't want to, be sort of spending all my time just working out the counting, or, where you're putting all the negatives as to why you don't want to do something. But eh, by being out of your comfort zone, I think that is part of your growth. You know where your boundaries are. Because then if I was asked again, I could have easily said, no, that's just really not for me. It's not quite sitting, just with my personality or character. But actually, it's some of my favorite music to play. So it just sort of shows you with a little bit of perseverance and time.
Oh my gosh. That's so wonderful to hear about your approach, and uh, it's I just have to say it's beautiful.
Well, I think it's interesting in that for all of us, in that a lot of the music I play, you can't have 10 different performances that you view on YouTube or something, because no one else has played that piece of music if it's a brand new piece. So you have to listen to yourself. You have to listen to the process of your journey, not someone else's journey trying to fit into your body and in your mind, but your journey. And it's like a technique, you bring the technique to your natural body. You don't try and force your body into a technique. So, for me, I'm 5'2". There are some pieces on marimba that have such a wide stretch, an arm stretch, that
Mhm.
no amount of extra hours of practice will solve that stretch for me. The stretch is a stretch. This is the kind of engine I have to work with. So you then have to make a decision as to whether you adapt that piece to your engine, or whether you shelve the piece, or whether you try and make the stretch and make a botch of it each time. So you've got choices. And I think that's really important to really listen and respect the body that you have. And that goes with the learning of things. It goes with the sort of things that you want to experiment, and just, so many of the choices you make in your particular journey. So that the internal listening really does need space and time.
It does, doesn't it? And somehow music teaches us that, doesn't it?
I think it does, and I'll be interested to, once I'm up in the clouds, to, you know, see how people listen and learn in 100 years' time, in 200 years' time, because at the moment we're soaked with so many things coming at us. And we're trying to juggle all these things. We've got a million different platforms on our phones and our laptops and this and that, that are needing our attention. And I think it takes a strong will to try to navigate through all of that and be in control of that. It's like driving a car, or flying a helicopter, or navigating a ship or something. You're not just turning the steering wheel, or operating one lever, or whatever it may be. There are
Sure.
absolutely a million things that you're negotiating and paying attention to, and so on. But ultimately, the aim, is to get from A to B, or whatever it might be, and as safely as possible. And um and uh, you know and also being aware of how you are in connection with that particular object, or the thing that you're engaging with. So yeah, I just think that we all have a responsibility to value that internal listening. I think we have a responsibility to really kind of take note of how we listen to other people. What does that mean? Because and that applies to what we write or what we email or what we WhatsApp or what we text or whatever it may be. So listening isn't just to a sound or related to a sound. It's,
Sure.
you know, listening is attention, and we're constantly seeking people's attention.
Well, I halfway through that particular comment, I was thinking about, yes, one of the more common topics right now is about how there's so many things that are driving and calling our attention. As you were talking about, we have apps, we have all these the cell phones, we have everything that's demanding on our time moment by moment and second by second. And this is a common conversation that people are having about the struggle it is and how challenging it is to pay attention to everything. And indeed, people do get lost in the whole process or just give up and don't bother.
Yeah.
But I think that, what has bubbled up in my experience that has become extremely valuable to me is the concept of mindfulness. And I think that this is a bit of what you're touching on is that if you pay attention to things moment by moment, step by step, by respecting, as you said, respecting the process, respecting its own time, because everybody has their own pace. Um, so
It,
respecting everything that's happening around you at every moment as you are engaged with it is a mindfulness activity. It's very much living in the moment and being aware of and listening to what's occurring around you.
yes, absolutely. I think that's right. And in a way, it's almost, I guess, you know, drawing upon that sort of childlike curiosity that's in us all. You know, when we're so young, our senses are incredibly active, open, receptive. Um, we, you know, engage with what's right in front of us, and so on. And obviously, the older we become, you know, we think about the future more, and we're not as present. And then we think about the past, and you know, I don't know if there is such a thing as the present. You know, it's so fleeting because it very quickly becomes the past in a way. But yet we're just always thinking then about the future, the future, the future. And it's just finding that balance, I think, to be just aware of our kind of inner energy, I think. And that energy can just be literally sitting down or standing up, you know, looking out a window, or just sitting in a park, or just sitting in, you know, in your living room, or just giving yourself a bit of space, you know, and giving the senses space and the senses time to speak with each other. Um, you know, just giving yourself time really. And I think, you know, part of that is the willingness to say, I need a bit of space, you know. I mean, just the other day, I was chatting with a concert promoter who, whereby the rehearsal will finish at 5:30 and the concert will start at 7:30. And of course, being a percussion player, you know, you're always fiddling around with your equipment and so on. And so, and he said, oh, there's a lovely couple who, you know, you can have a bite to eat with between the rehearsal and the concert, and they'll take good care of you and so on, which is lovely. I mean, that's a lovely thing to be offered. And but what I really needed was complete space. So that time to finish the rehearsal, do any last minute noodling if I wanted to do that, but then just sit and not talk to anybody. And so that sounds incredibly selfish, I have to say, especially being given the opportunity to go to someone's home and have a bite to eat and so on. But I know that then you obviously have to be respectful of the people whose home you're in. So, but I very just openly said I just need a little corner in the concert hall, and just a little bit of peace and quiet, and that would be lovely. That's all I need. And they were incredibly respectful and absolutely understood. So there's no issue at all. But it's just knowing that you can do that.
Well, yes, that is indeed the balance, is respecting other people's needs and trying to find the ways to fold them into your own needs is certainly a balancing act.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But of course, the most important thing, especially in a scenario like that, is to pay attention first to your own time and your own process, because that is the reason why you're there and the reason why they've invited you. So I'm sure that they would have understood that you just need your little corner.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, you had actually we had not spoken at all about your film Touch the Sound, but I'm very, very curious about it, and uh, for a number of reasons, but especially for the title. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yes, Touch the Sound actually now is quite an old film. It was, I think, released round about 2000 or something,
Oh,
and it was made by a wonderful German filmmaker, Thomas Riedelsheimer, and uh, and Thomas contacted me out of the blue and said he wanted to make a film about sound. And I kind of shut him down quite early. And I said, look, Thomas, if you want to concentrate on my deafness, I'm not interested, because I had quite a lot of things concentrating on that aspect of me. And I really just didn't want another thing. And he said, no, no, it's not about that. He said, it's more about sound. What is sound? How do we connect with sound? And but coming from your perspective. So bit by bit, he really caught my attention, and he allowed me the opportunity to look at some of the films that he made of the artist Andy Goldsworthy, and I was
oh,
absolutely enthralled by those. They were beautiful films. And talk about listening, he just Thomas just had an incredible way of letting films have their own pace, and allowing things to speak, and have just this wonderful kind of tempo of reflection, I suppose. I'm not quite sure what it is, but he's just a very special filmmaker. So I knew that I was in safe hands with him. And uh, and it was quite remarkable making the film, because it was a tiny, tiny crew. It was just basically Thomas, who did
oh,
most of the film work, and a very, very good sound engineer. He said the sound person was the most important person. It took about 2 years to make, because often they would have filmed if I happened to be in the US, or if I was in Japan, or somewhere in Europe. So they would just kind of piggyback on some of the trips that I was doing, as I was giving the concerts. And there's never a plan B. So I remember when Thomas said, "Oh, would you like to do the music with Fred Frith?" And I
oh,
said, okay. And Fred and I had never met before. And then the next thing we knew was that we were entering this derelict sugar factory in Germany, um, and loading our instruments into this very, very dusty, precarious kind of factory, that whereby the certain floors were collapsing, and there were holes everywhere, and goodness knows what, and birds flying around inside the building, and nests everywhere, and gosh, it was amazing. And so that was the first time we had ever met. And I said to Thomas, I said, well, what would happen if Thomas and I didn't get on? If the chemistry wasn't right, what's plan B, basically? And he said, oh, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And thankfully we did get on like a house on fire. and
oh,
uh, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. But really, Thomas he's such a special filmmaker. He really is.
wow, wow. What a nice story.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
mean, all the music for that film was improvised in the sugar factory, and
oh,
Fred, he taught me a lot about improvisation, and really from that moment on, that got me on my way to giving totally improvised concerts. And we did a few concerts together after that film project. Um, and he really was and is a remarkable man, and he continues to work quite closely with Thomas on his other films. So it's a really special partnership that they have.
And that makes me wonder if there are other musicians that you have worked with that you have found really intriguing.
Oh heavens! I mean, really, there's been a lot of collaborations and musicians, of all sorts who have been really wonderful to work with, and it's very difficult just picking a few because they're all very different. And I mean, I remember, getting the office got a phone call from Björk one day, and she said, "Oh, are you free on Thursday?" And I think she called up on the Monday or something, and because she wondered if I'd do something with her, and I said, "Well, actually, I'm not actually free this Thursday. We might need a little bit more notice than that." And when we put the phone down, I just thought to myself, "Oh well, that's an opportunity gone by, and whatever." But then after a while, she got in touch again, and she just wanted to get together to see, just out of curiosity, if there was anything that we could do together. And so she arrived at my studio at home, and she looked up at the shelves and she said, "Oh, what's that instrument?" And it might have been a bass kalimba or something. And I would take it down and start just playing whatever, and then she would start singing whatever, and that's how we went through the day. And we ended up with about 6 pieces, and some of those I've used on my recordings, and some she has used on her recordings. And uh, and it 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 was just a remarkable thing because there were no agents involved, there was no PR people involved. It was just two people coming together out of curiosity and having the freedom to experiment. And interestingly, we then, at the end of that day, we said, okay, maybe we should try to replicate this in a proper studio, with all the whistles and gongs kind of thing.
Sure.
Um, and so we went into a studio, tried to do it, and it absolutely didn't work at all.
Oops.
It just didn't work. That we were trying to copy what we had done, and
Right.
that wasn't what the exercise really was about in the first place. So we decided to keep the original recordings with all of the pops and the squeaks and the rattles and whatever, and that's what we used for our own CDs in the end. So, but that was special, and there are so many other ones as well.
Well, there's such a benefit from improvisation, working in the improvisational style because it's so fresh and it gives you
Yes.
it's the spontaneity. There's the immediacy of emotion. Even if you try to, you can never, ever, ever, as you discovered, replicate that. As soon as you try to, it sounds like you tried. You tried too hard.
It's so true, and it's a funny thing that, and I think, I feel this is why improvisation is so crucial, and so crucial to be nurtured right from the beginning of picking an instrument up. And actually, obviously, improvisation doesn't just belong to music. It belongs to movement and art and all sorts of things, and the use of vocabulary and whatever. But there's something about improvisation that I'd love to see in our music exams. We do our scales, we do our sight reading or transposition or whatever it may be, but nothing on improvisation. And I think
Right.
it's such a crucial, crucial thing for us uh, to really nurture and be aware of, because it's the one thing that can shut down, as you progress with your instrument. But sometimes you shut that kind of whole landscape of improvisation, and it becomes then linked to jazz musicians or folk musicians, and then you think, oh no, I can't do that because I'm not a jazz musician or I'm not a folk musician. But we can all do it, but we do have to keep nurturing that.
Oh, absolutely. With a lot of people that I'm talking to for my podcast, the topic of improvisation comes up over and over and over again. And as I was in my early years, I was a dancer, a professional ballet and modern dancer. Um, and I learned improvisation as one of the very first styles. And it's something that I've carried through, and it's taught me so much about living. And I've carried it through my life because of that, because it is this kind of experience of just acting and reacting. It's so simple and so direct and so truthful, that you're living in the moment and you're experiencing something and you're responding. And what it does actually is that it creates a beautiful, beautiful landscape for two people to form something that is unique and unique to that particular period of time.
Absolutely, yes, indeed. And when we're born and as infants, we are the most perfect improvisers. I mean, you watch babies, you watch little infants, negotiate their toys or a space or their food or whatever it may be, and they are literally improvising, and with that comes the curiosity and the finding out and seeing where the boundaries are with their relationship and what they're doing and all sorts of things like that. And it's usually an external force that then puts up the walls in their existence, and then this is where the tugs begin to happen. So yeah, it is interesting. And with improvisation, we're not talking about perfection. We're not looking at the idea of good and bad in quite the same way. um, it is, as you say, it's something that is literally happening there and then. You can't bottle it up and then replicate it. It's a living thing that has happened and then it's gone, but you have the experience of being part of that improvisation. And it is, I think, a very, very important uh, part of our growth. No matter how long we've been playing our instruments, it's and I think mentally we can continue with improvisation as well.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And oddly, I'm sorry to say, we only have a few minutes left of our time together. It's gone by so quickly, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Evelyn Glennie Foundation before we close and how it embodies your lifelong mission to teach the world to listen.
Absolutely. I think everything throughout my journey as a musician has led to the mission to teach the world to listen. And so we formed the foundation about 2 years ago. So it's a young organization, still in its infancy, and we're still putting the engine together, as it were, and building our board of trustees. But this is not, and just to be clear, this is not a music organization. This is an organization that taps into so many elements of society. So the work that we are involved with is, for example, going into prisons and really, connecting with people's stories within the prison and actually through improvisation. So I might go to a prison with very, very resonant instruments, deliberately resonant instruments like thunder sheets or a tam tam or a waterphone or singing bowls, or things that really resonate, and things whereby you need to sort of slow down the whole body in order to experience the journey of that sound. And also the kinds of sounds whereby there are no sort of leaders or followers. Literally everybody is working like a kaleidoscope to build a kind of wonderful sound palette and a landscape that is sort of non-reactive in a way, because a lot of the kind of environments that these people are in, the choices that they've made have often been very reactive, immediate, without sort of reflection. And so that's been very interesting. We've just actually been collaborating with folks at the Barbican Centre in London, whereby there's an exhibition there called Feel the Sound. And so we were part of that exhibition, and that will go on until the 31st of August, and then it will tour to different countries after that. So we were really contributing towards the importance of listening, and how we can change society by taking responsibility of our own listening. We've worked with people with dementia. We obviously open up the collection aspect that involves the instruments and a lot of the artifacts and the music scores and so on for research. So we've had people come in doing their PhDs using the collection, and in fact one lady has written a published book now. And we're just literally in conversation with the Children and Young People's Commissioner in Scotland, and this is really tapping into children's voices within the education sector, and not just hearing the kids, but really listening to them so that they can be part of the decision making in how they're educated and the systems that are put in place and so on. So everything has that kind of thread of listening, really. We're also in collaboration with or collaborating rather with Royal College of Music Museum and the Royal Academy of Music Museum. And this is to co-curate 2 exhibitions for next year and beyond. So lots of really interesting, diverse sort of projects. But the type of demographic that we tap into is literally right across the board. I mean, quite literally. So it's not to a certain age group or a different or a certain type of person. This is listening belongs to us all, and it affects us all.
It does. And I think that is a good point to stop at, unfortunately. I don't want to say stop because I want to hear more.
Well, reverberate on and on. Yeah.
Yes. But I want to thank you so much for all of your thoughts about listening, and I'm going to they will go with me throughout the day and follow me wherever I go. So thank you so much, Evelyn Glennie.
No problem. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Listening with China Blue. I hope it inspires you to build your own listening practice. This begins as a daily practice of attentively listening without judgment. And ask yourself, what is your version of silence? If you want to learn more about me and my work, go to chinablueart.com and please follow me on Facebook and at Instagram. Thank you.